Born October 5th, 1966, BC. And the BC in our hood is before crack. Some of the generations now, they born AC, after crack. Why would I refer to birth in this manner? From a historical perspective, looking back over the course of time and over the course of history and the struggles that Africans in diaspora in America, in my small area, had to go through. My parents were the part of the black migration from the deep south in the 50s and the early 60s to the northern cities, dealing with the social conditions at the time of segregation, discrimination, and racism. The prior to Brown versus the Board of Topeka, I believe it was the case that forced integration in the school system, fighting against this segregation property culture and the Jim Crow system. So I look at our generation, 1966 BC, as the integrationist generation. They have different labels and things that they utilize: Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. We were the integrationist generation, the children who had to be bussed into create synergy between the races, of which it did not exist, and the racial tensions at the time. This is during the period, looking back through the books, I won't even say history books, and the presidencies and the racial tensions in the time, and trying to develop a culture, an identity, cultural identity, the Black Power movement. We had the integrationist movement, Pan-Africanism was a thought. I believe that Liberia was already established, so we had teachings of Garvey available, so on and so forth. But our people, my ancestors, were in an extreme state of poverty at those times, looking back in the 60s and the 70s. And it's remarkable because my mother tells me that I don't forget anything. And that's not quite accurate. I've forgotten quite a bit over the course of time. Thank God, the Most High. So, just dealing with life and the choices and where I am today, having gone through phases in life and even still evolving and growing, and having children of my own and trying to utilize myself as an example to undo the multi-generational traumas that resulted from our experience and our ancestral experiences right down to the present day, and some of the choices and decisions, and me dealing with my emotion, my not knowing cultural differences, poverty, etc., which I don't feel is exclusive to me at all. What I think is that to have these conversations about the poverty, about history, the painful realities, look at them objectively and to dig into that painful past in order to carve a path out to a sustained present or a better present or a better future is how the healing begins. I think that to not look into our past to realize who we are, and deal with the results wherever the chips may fall. It's actually ML King Day today, and I looked on my channel and I saw the last time that I had chimed in to do a video or anything of that nature was something like 5 years ago. And it was interesting that I was talking about having a family reunion at that time. And of course, unfortunately, that did not transpire and did not happen. But at any rate, since then, a lot has occurred. There's been a lot of progress made, a lot of successes, very few failures in my plight and in my struggle to reacclimate into this world from an incarcerated state, which was officially over in 2014. So I look at my experiences from the 60s and my early childhood, and as much as I can and as far back as I can remember, and thank God the Most High that my mom is still alive. And when I can get information from her, she reluctantly provides some things, but my uncles are very informative as well. I've done the genetic testing, DNA testing through 23andMe, which is another subject and another story in and of itself. But nevertheless, according to them, my lineage goes back to Nigerian, and that's the closest they can get. And another 30% is genetically from Ghana, and that's as far back as they can go. I post various videos and things of that nature of historical content, Afrocentric, in a quest to gather a clearer understanding and consciousness of the past, to understand the present situation of not only myself but my descendants. And I also try quite successfully as well to understand my parents, grandparents, so on and so forth, and the plights of our people, the degradation of poverty, and to have an explanation of why. The slave trade as a focal point before America was, the Americas were. And not only in looking at North America, but I've also ventured out to look into South America and the different places that were colonized by Europeans, the whole mindset and the whole 9 yards, as well as looking at how and why Africans, who they were, to identify who they were, the tribes, during that time frame. And there are obstacles and barriers to research in this area. Everything that's on the internet can't be trusted as a source, obviously. Nevertheless, there are many sources and resources here on the internet that can further one's consciousness and enlightenment in this very important area of understanding poverty and the decisions that we make, how we make them, why we make them, to this day, and how it's impacted by our parents, grandparents, and how things were passed down from generation to generation, dealing in oppressive conditions. Uh, and it would be that so many would like for black people, descendants of this human atrocity, to forget. Or they would say, why would you want to revisit that? And for me, the reality is that even if one pulls oneself up by the bootstraps and quote unquote makes it and is successful in this life and in this world and this economy as it is, that does nothing for the whole or the masses. And the whole notion of reparations and accountability for past atrocities. I'm not leaning towards that being a reality in my lifetime, but I never thought that I would see a black man as president of the United States either, which came to pass, and it's just so many different things that I contemplate. But this whole notion to go back and just a step or two of 1966 BC before crack. Crack was an epidemic in our community, but not unlike heroin, which was an epidemic in our communities in the 70s. And I mention this because I am a seasoned gentleman at this point, and I've seen things that over the course of 50 plus years at this point, where there is a younger generation with children and grandchildren under my belt. And even with that, one of my grandchildren now is able to actually reproduce. So it's like great grandchildren can be on the way. And there's a possibility, not that we want that or encourage that, but time is ticking. And it's like I look at the generations under me at this point and compare and look and observe some of the behaviors, ideas, the struggles that they currently have in the present. And I'm constantly mulling over ways to help to make a difference, whether it be through words, whether it be through tough love, harsh words, good words, realistic words, but they're all from my perspective. And there's, in my opinion, there's no actual leadership or collective body that's respected enough as a figure or as a model of how to be successful in this world. What do we need to do? How do we do it? Where do we go for resources and education and things of this nature? It's just so many different variables that have to be contended with to overcome this poverty, to overcome history. And it's not even so much so because we're in the midst of a time where the 45th president is Donald J. Trump. And, the news media cycle is inundated with just various different comical positions and fear mongering and a whole gang of Make America Great Again attitude and sentiment. In addition, which that, in my opinion, has quite possibly made more overt the racism and the racist attitudes that have always existed but were laying dormant for quite some time. And not even so much dormant, they just weren't blatant with it. Which brings me back to the 70s. And also dealing with J. Edgar Hoover's administration when they implemented the COINTELPRO program to infiltrate black organizations with black leadership, or which they label as militancy, and so on and so forth. So I'm talking to say that I went and I tried to find information about this place, this building, this institution from the 70s on Prospect Avenue in Westbury, the Kazuri Youth Center. And I recall vividly, because that's where I was raised, and, the teachings of Pref Komat, for those who remember and can recall. As I said, I'm 66 BC, okay? With V-Dyke and Grizz, Nisa, 9 to 5, and so many more, myself, Des, Red, we were there. And even at that time, it was a time of dashikis. It was a conditioning of black power and black empowerment. And during that time, as throughout history, we have been not a collective people. Hence, if we were, the transatlantic slave trade could not have possibly taken place. In the course of my studies, I had to honestly look at, and I wanted to look into, the tribes and black people who actually sold their brothers and sisters, of whom they did not consider brothers and sisters, obviously, because who would do that, sell their brother or sister into slavery? And that is part of the reality that, we look to blame the European. We don't even look at the different aspects and territories and countries and circumstances of how huge this transatlantic slave trade was. We hear in our song and our dance now conversation and implications of not having a culture, not having, our language stripped. As I'm speaking to you now, I'm speaking to you in English as best I can to communicate a message, but the African in me has never been, but it's there. And to really know what that is like, we know what it's like. And the more conscious and root discovering that I get is more pronounced, which Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad, Louis Farrakhan, and the teachings of the Nation of Islam and others where they adopted the X for their own unknown of who we are. The slave master's last name. And that's interesting as well. You know, just doing a matrilineal search, going back through the archives, and it's some interesting things that I found down in Tyrell County, North Carolina, about, you know, the intermarriage and quite possibly who was a slave and who wasn't, where the red hair came from, and all that good stuff. That 6% British and Irish that Ancestry.com, 23andMe, said I have genetically 6% European in me. Where that came from. But none of this is unique to myself. And even my desire to know these and understand, you know, knowing to bring about an understanding, to extract the wisdom, and then to be able to communicate it in an intelligible manner, is not a desire that everyone has. They're not willing to do the legwork, or they have no desire to do the legwork, whether it's just surviving, a quest to just deal with the present. You know, it's enough to struggle today than to worry about the struggles of the past. Although I can make a connection to the struggles of the present being a result and a continuation of the struggles of the past. Again, you know, I don't want to keep the focus on me. I try to stay low key. It's probably why I haven't ventured to do a video in over 5 years, or to put myself out in the limelight, live or whatever, because these videos go nowhere. But nevertheless, 1966 BC, crack was an epidemic. I got hit with it. It was during my time. But the struggle in the 60s is, I was born shortly before the assassination of Martin. And I guess it's befitting on ML King Day that things are on my mind when I look back and reflect over the course of time. You know, great childhood for a child. Did a lot of playing, school, education. Again, the plight of being in a generation of integration. So these are topics that should be explored, you know. And the reason I bring that up, if we do a timeline, I say, you know, I was bussed around, and my generation was bussed around Little Rock, Arkansas, with police escorts going into these schools. Okay. The parents or the educators or the teachers were part of systematic racism their entire lives. They were part of the segregation system, who were being forced by the federal government to now accept black children into their classrooms, into their institutions, to quote unquote give us equal education. So what was taught in the school system, the curriculums being developed, et cetera, did nothing for the attitudes or the racist mentalities, even though they couldn't, quote, be public about it. But how do you undo black only, white only attitudes of adults? So if you take 1966 BC, my mom is 1943 BC, and my pops was like 1935, somewhere around there, 39 maybe. And I recently questioned, knowing that the Deep South, Georgia, Sandersville, Georgia, on Plantation Road, that's where my father was at, why there was a mass migration. Not even questioning it. This is a fact. It was a mass migration of black people, black men and women, leaving the Deep South because of the Jim Crow system, to come north. So those were my parents. And as a collective, in the 70s, everybody wasn't on the same accord. Everybody wasn't an integrationist. And that's just a fact. Whether it did us more good or more harm, the jury's still out on that. What I do know that I believe in cause and effect, and change. But it definitely had an impact. So during my childhood and the plight of integration, our leaders and our thinkers in our community, we were soldiers. We had to be soldiers because of the hostile environment that we were forced to be in. I recall clearly when the Atlanta kidnappings, and how that impacted us nationally, where we had our black and white TV with the rabbit ears before the digital era. I recall all of this stuff clearly. And I remember the teachings of Cheme Vidike. But we had to fight. We were prepared to fight for our rights. And not like NWA, you gotta fight. Or it might not have been, no, the Beastie Boys, pardon me, for your right. We wasn't fighting for the right to party. We were impoverished. Coming from an unequal system, and still unequal to this day. And so, just to keep it rather brief, you may look at some of the things that I post in regards to slavery, in regards to the Jim Crow era, in regards to reparations and things of this nature, and have some feelings about me, and that's cool. So I just wanted to do a little video of me so that you could see who I really am. I won't forget. I can't forget. You know, when your father has been murdered and it's an unresolved mystery. That man, Leroy Poole Jr., the migrant from the Jim Crow South, because he was a fighter against oppression and tyranny. The ideas and ideologies and so on and so forth. Having studied law, that's great. You know, the hypocrisy. And what's amazing is, to me, the hypocrisy, one of the hypocrisies that is truly baffling is you go to apply for employment or something of that nature, or you go to apply for weapons or credit or whatever, you know, the plight may be. They do a background check, government job or whatever, to determine your character, look to your past to determine who they're dealing with and whether or not you're adequate for employment or whatever it is, that a security clearance, whatever. Look to the past. When I do my background check, I wouldn't hire you. And I'm not talking about black people. You know, these murders and rapes, genocide of entire races and tribes of people, your hatred, you sit in no position of authority or right judgment when you're an oppressor, when you're a racist. Can't be my leader. Not by no means no means, man. Ever. So I watched the plight of this generational trauma, of which I help to perpetuate because I have children of my own. However, as my dad was in my life, I'm in theirs. And this is a part of me being in your life. I share me. I remember. And we're getting older. I'm getting older. And the consciousness of the centuries, well, the decades before. Don't take them for granted. Barry Weinstein didn't walk a mile in my shoes. Martin Schulman didn't walk a mile in my shoes. But they judged me. 20 years a slave, returned to the plantation. But the strength, determination, the God in me, knowing who I am and what I am and what I had to do to talk to you and try and be a benefit and a use. Our strength, our endurance, our determination, our drive, our goals. Even with people's boots on our necks, we still rise. That's who we are. I'm not here singing no old ancestral Christian church song. That was given to us by an oppressive people, a barbarous people, barbarians. I don't want to stay long and bore. Just wanted to say what's up. Just wanted to say what's up. Peace.